Okay, it's been almost a week since I made the base and the lid for our covered casserole dish. And in my garage studio with 700% humidity, things take a while to dry. So they are just barely leather hard at this point, and I'll kind of give you an update on what I did. I had left both pieces attached to the bat and hadn't wired them off. But when they got just barely dry enough to deal with, I wired off the lid piece so that it was free from the bat. And then in order to get it flipped over, I took the base and inverted it onto the lid and then turned the whole works over. At which point I could take the first bat off. And then I ended up running the wire under the base so it didn't get too incredibly stiff and painful to wire off later. So at this point in the video, we have the lid resting on top of the base. The base is still sitting on its original bat. Even though it's been wired off, it didn't move. So I'm just gonna leave it. It's gonna stay stuck enough to that clay that I'm not gonna worry about hold down clay. And I'm gonna show you how to go ahead and trim the arch into the top of the lid that will match the inside of the lid. And then we'll talk about handle additions and also putting a handle on the lid. So I'm going to readjust the camera and we're going to get right to it. As you can see, the lid is centered on the base, and we've got this raggedy edge that used to be the floor of the pot, or the underside of the pot. What we need to do now is just use the trim tool to create a beautiful line from the center out to where the thrown section of this lid began. So let's just start in the middle actually, and take a little clay off. I'm working deeper as I get to the outside. In wood turning, I would call this hogging off the waste. You can see this trimming is like the size of my finger. It's a really, I don't know, kind of an aggressive cut. I need to chill out now. I've got that first little heavy cut taken care of. And now I need to get a little bit more refined, slow my tool down, and none of that is actually necessary. You don't have to be in a hurry. I'm just an impatient person, and I like to just remove material kind of quickly. I think I just enjoy the process. I'm just kind of rounding this out some more. As I get closer to my final shape, I need to move around a lot less. I need to let the wheel do the work and really control the position of the tool. So you can notice I'm dropping my elbows down against my legs, locking my hands together, creating a strong triangle shape so that I'm defining where this cutter moves in three-dimensional space. And it's not that I'm just kind of randomly working myself over the surface. So you can see we're almost down to the point where there's no articulation here between the thrown part and the rest of the dome. I think because of the way I threw this, it might be nice to put a detail. Should my kiln just shut off? I'm going to take a little pause and come right back. All right, sorry about that. The kiln decided to shut itself off prematurely. Had to go deal with that. It's the joys of being a potter is dealing with machinery and electronic things that don't always work the way you want them to. But we'll get back to this trimming job here. We're getting there. Let's just go ahead and start refining the shape. So we're starting to create a dome. You'll notice I am starting in the very center, but I can actually still see the wire off marks on the middle. I don't really want to take it down in the center. This isn't a foot ring. This is just trimming a smooth curve into the whole lid. And when I threw it, the goal at least was to leave 1/4 of an inch in the center so that I don't have to worry about removing any material there. I can just sort of keep starting there so I get a nice line, working my way out, maintaining control of the tool. take the trimmings off so you can kind of see how that's developing. And I think it's starting to look really good. It's important to get your head down and see what you've got going on. And I've been working with the point of my tool facing to the right, but I don't really want to dig in to this rim here. So I'm going to turn the tool around and have the point face towards the middle, and I'll use that rounded part of the tool to start transitioning between the thrown part and the rest. There's a little bit of a concave area right underneath that rim, and I don't find that to be a problem at all. I just don't want to have sort of a harsh line there. So I'm taking much finer trimmings at this point. I don't know if you can see it in profile, but this is whisper thin, as opposed to those initial trimmings that were really coarse. That difference really only works if your clay is on the soft side. You can't take big fat trimmings if your clay is stiff. You'll just pull things apart. Now that was demonstrating why a lot of times I like to work from the middle out on those initial ones, because I started coming in towards the center and all that loose stuff was in the middle and kind of in my way of continuing the line. So sometimes you just have to stop and pick that stuff up before you can finish the cut. Almost done. Raising the handle of the tool at this point to adjust the bevel angle so that I'm producing a little bit smoother cut. Theoretically, I should be holding it correctly the whole time, but I was being a little bit lazy before. This is not a one-handed operation. You can see I've got both hands involved, so I'm making that nice, strong, stable triangle, and that helps me absolutely define that curve. All right, I'm really starting to like that. I'm gonna just take a quick pass, not even really cutting anything, just to catch all the little goobers. And then I can come back at this stage. One more goober left. And I can use my rib and rib over this surface so that it looks more compatible. I don't want it to look like I trimmed it from a solid block of clay. I want it to look thrown as well. I need to be a little bit careful not to stick the lid down to the rest of the pot. So I'm going to be a little bit gentle when I'm out here at the edge. And then I'm gonna kind of curve it and form the shape of the rib to the shape of the dome here. And you can see all of a sudden, instead of it all looking totally just trimmed, it's starting to have a little bit more of a ribbed, thrown kind of character. I'm going to continue to clean off that rib. And I've got it down at kind of a low burnishing angle rather than a scraping angle. One more pass. A little more pressure this time. All right, so there's my nice domed lid. At this point, I need to start thinking about the finishing touches. So I'm gonna put casserole handles on the side of this, and they're going to be handles that you can get up underneath with oven gloves and be able to get this thing out of the oven and to the table. And then I need some way to take the lid off, and so you can throw a knob, but I never find that super satisfying visually. I can see some advantages to a knob, especially if it's a knob that's sort of wide and flat and maybe highest at the perimeter, so that you could turn the lid over and set it on its knob and it wouldn't roll around. But visually, I really think a loop handle is going to be so much more appealing. It's going to give me a chance to be a little bit more creative. And so I'm going to put handles that are derived from a wheel thrown component on the sides here and a pulled handle on the top that's going to meet here. That'll give me a chance to show you a couple of different techniques. So I'm going to set this aside and show you how to make the precursor of the handles that are going to go on the side of this piece. So stay tuned. So I actually took the trimmings that just came off the lid and wedged them up, and they're soft enough. I'm going to use them to make the handles, both for the lid and for the sides. Part of the reason I did that is I used recycled clay, and I don't know what I did with the rest of the clay that I was using for this specific piece, and because of that, I wouldn't necessarily be able to find a matching clay. So I was feeling pretty happy that I was able to wedge this up. I'm going to show you one little quick trick. You know, the wheel is such a wonderful tool for keeping things aligned and symmetrical and round. So I'm going to use the wheel twice in the making of the handles for this piece. The first time when I'm making the the pulled handle for the lid, I need to figure out how to get it to line up over the center, or it's going to look really silly. And so I made this nice and smooth, but I'm going to kind of visualize where I want the outside edge of my loop handles to be. And then I'm just going to take my pinky fingernail and I'm going to just gently make a circle. It's going to be really faint. I'm sure you can't even see it on the camera, and it's absolutely not going to show up in a glaze. So it's just a little guide mark. Make it a little bit more distinct so I can see it. Maybe you can see it now on the screen. Anyway, I've got a circle. It's about that wide, and I'm going to use that little tiny mark to tell me where to put the outer edges of my loop handle. So I'm going to take part of this clay and tear it off, and I'm going to go ahead and show you here how I form the precursor to that pulled handle. So I squeeze it into kind of a little egg shape. I roll it between my hands, and this one I want it to be symmetrical on both ends, so I'll keep turning it over and I'll keep bopping it on both ends. I'll roll it, and what I'm looking for is a handle that tapers, bigger at the ends, smaller in the middle. Keep bopping it back. And then normally I'd get up and go to the table, but for videography purposes, I'm gonna grab a bat here, and I'm using one of these Masonite ones so it won't get stuck. And I like to sort of smack this down really firmly so that I pre-flatten the inside of that handle. So here goes. I'll do it twice, since there's a little bit more give here against my leg than there would be at the table. So you can see I've got it flat on the bottom and rounded on the other side. And I'm going to set this whole project aside so I can pull the handle for you right in front of the camera. So I'll move my throwing bucket here so you can see, and show you a little bit about how I like to hold on to this. I need to be able to grip this from both ends, and I need to have access to this whole middle. So here's the steps. Put your hand palm down, thumb sticking out. Curl your fingers back until the tips of your fingers are pointing back towards your wrist. Lay the handle against the side of your index finger, and then wrap your thumb around. So you can see I am holding this just by the last ½ inch of the clay, and I have access to the entire remainder of it. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and start pulling this handle, but I'll be letting off the pressure as I get to this other fat end. And eventually, at some point during the process, I'm going to flip it around and hold it by the other side, so that I have a chance of having it be symmetrical in this direction. So here goes. I'm going to wet my hand and start thinning. kind of stopping when I get to that bottom so they don't pull all the way through. Okay, so here's where I am right now. It's starting to look fairly symmetrical. It's got a nice ridge on the outside edge, which I appreciate visually. And at this point, it's getting close to the thickness that I'm looking for. I want this to be nice and sturdy because it's going on a big, heavy lid. But I'm gonna go ahead and hold it and switch my grip to the other end. And because my hand was dry, even though that end is sort of wet, I've got a decent grip on it. I'm gonna go ahead and pull it the rest of the way from this side. All right, so you can kind of see that handle is pretty symmetrical up and down. It's got a nice little ridge on it, and it's a good length based on that circle, where if I cut the ends off, it's going to make a nice, not too high arch, but high enough that I can reach in there with an oven mitt and take that lid off and not end up dropping it and breaking the lid. So I'm going to pull it one more time just to kind of straighten it out, make it happy. I don't dry these over a form to put the curve in them. I get the curve by attaching the two ends at the distance apart that I want. I don't really believe in drying it on a curve because I never know exactly what I want that curve to look like. So there's not much point. I just dry it to the point where the sheen comes off the surface and just let it sit flat like that. And it'll automatically form a curve once I put it together. So I'm going to set that aside and show you the other half of this project where we take advantage of the wheel for making handles. I'm going to place another bat on. There's really no reason. Actually, since I lost one bat pin, I'll go ahead and just do this straight on the wheel head. All right, so I'm going to take this remaining clay and dry my hand a little bit so I can make it into a ball. Smack it down, and what we're going to form this into is a bottomless ring. And the reason we're doing this is I want to make handles that adhere to the side of the piece and just stick out like lugs. And in order to have them symmetrical, I can cut them both from a circle of clay, and that is one of the best things I ever figured out. I used to try to pull a handle and split it down the middle and use the two sides and all kinds of things that I learned early on, but this has turned out to be what I think is the best way to form this style of handle. So pushing pretty hard on this clay, it's fairly stiff since it is just wedged up trimmings. And I'm going to go ahead and open all the way down to the wheel. Now the length is pretty unimportant. You're almost always going to produce more length of handle than you need for the project at hand, and that's fine. All I'm concerned about is getting a ring that is the right height so that the handles don't stand too far out from the casserole, and the right weight, so the right thickness. So basically, if it's wanting to be too tall or too thick, I just need to make the circle get bigger. Here's where I use my favorite, squishing down on top with my right hand while drawing out with the left hand and keeping my left thumb against the wall of the clay. So my left fingers are inside, pulling outward. My left thumb is against the outside edge, keeping it sealed. And my right hand's over the top of the whole works, crushing downward and dispensing water if I get dry. All right, so I'm gonna keep going because I still feel like I have way too much clay here for the size of lugs that I'm trying to make. And that's all I'm really thinking about. I'm sort of predicting how whatever cross-sectional area I have here is going to turn into the cross-section of the handle that I'm looking at. So we're getting there, but I'm going to take it out a little bit farther. Early on in the learning how to do this, you tend to produce handles that are overly bulky. They look kind of silly. The handles stick out too far. So I've got something that's kind of sort of that much space, and that's going to be great. I don't want to get too much of the clay away from the base because the base is where it attaches to the pot. But I'm going to just pull this up just a touch. Really just giving it a little squeeze and letting go. So I have something that's about 1 inch tall, which is plenty to get those oven mitts underneath. And now it's just a question of kind of drying it and refining it. I hope this is all making sense. If you haven't ever seen this, you might be wondering what the heck I'm doing. Basically, this is just going to be the beginning of the handle that I attach. So some people might be tempted to use an extruder to do something like this, but I think my hands and the wheel are the most flexible extruder die ever created. Certainly, if you're just making a couple of things, there's no sense in cutting a custom extruder die and going from there. Though you could, if you were going to go on a crazy production run and just make casseroles all day, you could create this flat at the bottom, tapered cross section, and just extrude big coils of it and cut it up. That'd be another way to get your precursor nice and uniform. All right, I'm going to use the rib and crisp it up and dry it up. I don't want this to be all covered in goo because I want to be able to start manipulating it right away. Coming on the inside too. And that's looking pretty good. I think I'm going to take a really well squeezed out chamois and just make sure there's no hard edges on this. And I'll show you how to figure out how to cut these to the same length, just using the wheel again. Really want to get all the moisture out of this because I don't want it to drip down. Who else feels like chamois are your best friend and worst enemy at the same time? All right, just wrapping that top, just to make sure I don't have any sharp edges. All that for that little move. Okay, here's the exciting part. So I'm gonna take my wire tool and I'm gonna free this ring of handle precursor from the wheel. So I'm just gonna cut in until I see it on the inside of the ring. Let the wheel go around one more time, and now I'm gonna come out. All right, that decided to kind of move off of its original center, which is fine, but a lot of times what I do when I wanna get two pieces that are exactly the same is I cut it right across the center using the bat pen holes as guides. I'm gonna have to use my eye as a guide now because this thing has moved, and that's fine. My eye works pretty well. But I really love it when it stays put and I can just cut it in half directly just by cutting right over the bat pen holes. And then I move diagonally in some direction and keep my wire over the center, and I make a second cut. And that ensures that the two pieces are cut to the exact same length. So let me go ahead and just turn it so that I can eyeball right across the center. And I'm gonna make that first mark that just divides the circle in half. And then I'm gonna think about how much of this length do I need? The way I make these, I attach them and then I kind of fold the edges down. So I tend to make a longer handle attachment than seems right to begin with. It's definitely longer than the finished handle is going to be. So I could cut it into quarters, and that would give me a pretty long handle. I think what I'm going to do is cut it a little bit diagonally from there, so I have a shorter option and a longer option. Actually, I'm going to cut it in perfect quarters. I think they're going to be a little bit longer than I need, but I can always come back and shorten them up. All right, so I've got my marks now, and I'm going to just use, instead of cutting through both of them, which really won't work, I'm going to use the wire tool kind of like dental floss, and I'm going to cut down on my mark to the wheel head and kind of saw it so it goes all the way through, and then just let go of the free end of the handle, the free end of the wire, and just open that up so you don't cut back out through the same hole. A lot of times you'll end up messing up the handle if you try to cut down and back up. And I want the end to be fairly neat. So again, I'm just going to kind of move that out of my way and get the handle out. This is nice if you're producing more than one casserole in a setting. You can make a big ring like this, and I would have enough for 4 handles. So at this point, I need to wait for a little minute, let this stiffen up a little bit, and then I'm going to put the casserole back on the wheel and show you how we're going to attach these and refine them into something that looks like a nice handle instead of just an extruded shape. So I'm going to clean my hands. I'll be right back. Okay, I've got my board where I set aside my pulled handle, and I'm going to go ahead and move these very carefully all to that same board. I'm going to line them all up so I can kind of see how well they match. Might move this guy over so I can just line them up one after the other. Now, I'm not going to need 4 handles, but I've got 4 pretty equivalent handles, so if I have a little oops and drop one or something, I'll go ahead and hold on to these until I know I've got my handles attached, and then at that point I'll recycle the ones that I don't need. So I'm going to just set it down and kind of line them up a little bit straighter. So I can see how they match up. It looks like I've got 3 that are the same and 1 that's a little bigger. And that's just a function of having done this on a circle that had gotten shifted off center. So if I'd been a little more careful with how I wired off, I probably would have 4 that matched. It seems like these 2 in the middle are my best pair, so I'm going to use those first and save the other ones for oopsie times. Of course, you could cut a little bit off of this to make it match and get another pair if somehow you screwed up 2 different handles. Let's go ahead and bring our casserole back and put it on the wheel. I found my bat pin. It was stuck in the bat. All right, so this is exciting. It's time to think about putting the loop handle at the top. So I want to take a scratcher tool and roughen up these 2 areas and go ahead and attach it. I'm still left with a handle here that's untrimmed. So let me show you how to trim that. I'm gonna do it kind of on my lap and hopefully you can see past the casserole. I use my needle tool, take the clay off of it, and I start thinking about how I want the handle to spring off of this lid. If I wanted it to come straight up and loop over and come straight down on the other side, I would cut this handle off with my tool held perpendicular to my work surface. However, I actually want these to spring inward a little bit. I want them to form kind of a triangular handle. So I'm going to hold the tool angled a little bit as I cut off, and I'm also going to arc it just slightly to sort of match the arc of the domed lid. So hopefully you can see this from the side. I'm going to start at one side of this handle, cut in with it angled like that. It's much easier to do on the table. Cut out the other side. So I'm going to take the end of that clay and show you. It's arched and it's also beveled. You can see that angle on there. And whatever that angle is, that's how the handle is going to spring away from the pot. Now, the challenge is to make that exact same cut on the other side. So I turn the whole board around and clean my needle, hold on to the end of it, and I'll try to make the exact same cut. Same angle, same arc. And let's see how I did. I'm going to compare these two ends. They're similar, angles match up pretty well, so I will call that pretty good. How about? Perfection isn't necessary. Hey, these are supposed to be handmade objects. So one other thing I like to do before I go to slipping and scoring is gently with flat, clean fingers, pick this handle up, and I'm going to take the end of it and support it on either side, take my finger and just hammer on it a little bit. I want to tap on it until that end flares out just a touch. The point of that is to give myself a little bit more surface area to scratch and to give a little bit of a kind of a, you know how a tree branch grows out of a tree, there's a little sort of collar of material that gives it support. I don't want this just to look like it ended at the handle. I want it to look like it's got some attachment material. So that's why I hammer on this end a little bit. It's doubly good. More surface area and kind of a little bit of a flare to look like that handle is going to stay on there. So that's what that looks like. All right, we're going to reposition things and grab a scratcher tool and show you exactly how to stick this thing on. All right, we're back with my favorite original, somewhat worse for the wear scratcher tool. You can see this was a wooden handle with a pack of sewing needles epoxied into it. And over time, those needles have become a little bit more sparse, but that's okay. This is actually pretty perfect. So these are good. Those feather texture brushes from Kemper are also great. I'm going to rough up the end of this handle, and then I'm going to flip it around carefully and rough up the other end. You don't want to scrimp on the roughing part. And then I have some slurry right here on my rib. Heck, let's just use the rib. Add a little bit, not a lot, it's just like glue. You want to add just enough to make it sticky, but not so much that it's going to ooze out everywhere. A lot of times after I put slip on, I'll re-scratch it just a little bit. So it's all just a real scratchy, rough, gooey mess. All right, now here's that circle that told me where I want the outside edge of my handles to attach. You could also make a circle that defined the inside edge of your handle, doesn't matter, but I was thinking I wanted to define the outside edge. And so I'm gonna come and kind of eyeball how wide is that, what kind of a shape is it, and I will rough up the area that I need inside that circle in order to have a good landing spot for the ends of this handle. And I'm hoping that I estimated everything well, and I'm going to have a pleasing amount of lift and curve. Come 90 degrees to that. I have scored up a slightly bigger area than what I think I need. I would rather have a little bit of excess scoring than not enough. I'm going to take just a little goober of glue and kind of spread that around. Score it and spread it at the same time. I'm taking extra care to get this handle on there right, because these projects, I mean, this thing has been days and days in the making. There's still plenty of time for it to go wrong. My favorite is when you glue them together with the glaze in the kiln and you're really cursing. But when you put this much effort into a single project, you know, take a little extra time and make sure that handle's going to stay on. All right, I'm orienting this handle so it's facing kind of away from my body, and I'm going to very carefully take the end of it and attach one side. I'm supporting it so it doesn't really bend. I'm going to give it what I call the jiggle push. I'm going to kind of vibrate it and try to get those little scored up areas to just grab each other and feel securely attached. I don't want to have to do a lot of smearing or smushing. I just want to get it on there and feel happy that it's going to stay secure. Then once I have that side, pretty much it's on there, it's good. I'm going to carefully grip the other end and bend it up in the middle and get this end to make its connection at the opposite point. And again, kind of jiggle it and make sure that it's going to stay on there. kind of looking at that ring and trying to make sure that it's at the right outward extent there. I'm going to turn it so you can see what I have so far. A little bit asymmetrical, but we're matching up with the ring pretty well. Kind of reach in here and adjust, push that out just a little bit. And then I'm going to turn it a couple of times, just make sure I like the symmetry, make sure I'm lined up over the center. This handle isn't perfectly symmetrical because it was made with my imperfectly symmetrical hand, and that's fine. I want to make sure there are no like lifted edges. So I'm just taking the flat of my thumb and kind of pressing down around the edge, but I'm not smearing it in. I'm just sort of with a dry finger pressing it, and I want to kind of reach with my pinky inside and check that the inside is not loose as well. There's a little loose spot here. Just pressure, not smearing. And that's my taste. You know, you could smear it in, blend it in, make it kind of disappear. I don't like that. I like to actually see the edges of my handle because I feel like I spend a lot of time working on making them kind of sculptural, and I don't want to just blend them away. I'll wait until things stiffen up to get in here with maybe a short bristled brush and clean up the extra scored areas that I don't need. But right now what I can do, because I know that that's really securely on there, I'm going to make sure I don't have any little dry crusty bits on my fingers. And I'm going to go up underneath there with a damp finger and adjust the shape of this curve. So I'm going to kind of sit back so I can see it. It's higher over here than here. So I'm going to kind of swoop towards the middle from both sides. And I'm going to turn it around so I can see it from the other side too. And the question is, do you want a rainbow? Do you want a rooftop? Do you want coming up and then flat across the top? Functionally speaking, you're probably best off with something that's fairly flat on the top. It means it's going to fit lower in the cupboard and be a little bit easier to kind of grab that oven glove. I sometimes love the peaked handle, but I feel like that's not as easy to get a hold of, and it takes up too much space. So I'm going to let function dictate aesthetics today. So I'm going to continue to work, but instead of coming up from the outside, I'm going to come from the middle and work towards the edges. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And what that's doing is kind of bringing the outermost part to more of a, not a right angle, but horizontal and then down. Re-wetting that finger, do the same thing on this side. So starting in the middle and working my way out, kind of running into the attachment point. It's a good way to find out if you've got it stuck on there. And then I can take my flat fingers and just press a little bit on top. And hopefully what you'll see when I turn it is a very functional looking, but also aesthetically pleasing handle that kind of comes in, up, and across. So I may do a little bit more refinement on that once it stiffens a little longer, but that's my basic shape. I feel like I could get an oven mitt in there, lift that thing off, set it aside, and be pretty happy with it. These little rubber nubby tools are kind of great. I can get up underneath here, and I just noticed that I was a little aggressive and sort of pulled that connection open, and I can just sort of recompress it and make sure that there's not going to be a gap. Absolutely doesn't really matter functionally. It just looks like to somebody looking at it that, hey, that handle's cracked. It's not that it's cracked, it's just there's a little separation there. So I'm just going to kind of fill that in. If you're having trouble with the inside connection, let's say you cut your bevel a little bit too strongly diagonal, you can roll a little thin coil of clay and backfill that juncture, and that can be a nice solution to your problem. But I really like these little rubber fingers. I can't get my little pinky in there, but the end of this, it's just a soft rubber stylus. The other end of it is a little metal ball that I use for sanding the bottoms. So I have no idea where this tool came from, but it's a handy one. All right, so the lid is pretty much done at this point. Now I need to attach my side handles, and I'm going to go ahead and I've got two options. I can use my bat pin holes to center the two handles, or I can line them up based on the axis of my handle. Had I been smart, I would have oriented the handle to the bat pin holes, and then everything would have visually been kind of lining up, but draw your own conclusion there about how much I was thinking ahead. So even though it's kind of more mechanical, I'm going to use the bat pin holes as my visual aid for lining this handle up. This is something you can't do from this position. You've got to get down where you can really see it from the side. Sometimes I'll take the whole bat and put it up on a stool so I can see it at eye level. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to move my stool and get myself down to the level of the pot. So not the world's most comfortable way to work, but here we go. So there is my bat pin on the far side. I have created a little bead or detail below the rim. And I think what I'd like to do is have my handle attach just below that point. So where I'm pointing here, there's that bead and there's a little line. So I'm going to get right over the bat pin hole. I'm going to start scratching that area. And I'm going to move right and left of it, kind of the same amount. And I'm really going to rough this thing up nicely. We're going to be attaching that really long strip of clay that came from the thrown ring. So I'm going to turn it so you can see. You can see that big area that I scratched up. Again, you'd rather have more scratching that you have to smooth out later than try to stick a handle to something that's not scored up. It will end up pulling away and causing you trouble. So I'll go ahead and do the other side. I'm going to dip my tool in some water, and I like to mark the middle first so I kind of have an idea, and I do that with vertical lines, and I'll come out and go out as wide as I think I need to go on either side. It is pretty important to get these at the same height, and because I have this little detail, that's easy. I've got it, that's locked in, but getting them symmetrically across the two sides of the pot is harder than you'd think. You'd think, okay, fine, but you can't really see over here while you're working here. So the bat pins are your friend. All right, so we've got the two ends scored up. Add a little moisture to this side too. And then I'm going to grab that board full of handles and we're going to start preparing them to get stuck on. So they're here. I'm going to carefully lift one of the two that I thought matched the best. That's what it looks like. And I'm going to roughen it up really well. I'm going to add a little slip. I think slip's pretty important on these. It's a big area of attachment, and you don't want to leave a lot of little gaps in the clay where those scoring lines are effectively creating little voids in the surface. So I'm going to kind of coat this whole thing with a little bit of gooey slip. Not thickly, but thoroughly and evenly. And I'll set my scratcher tool down. What used to be the outside of the ring is going to be the top surface of my handle. And I suppose you could do it the other way around, but because I'm going to be folding the ends of it down, it already has a little tendency to want to curve the way it was a circle. So I'm going to work with that. It's definitely important that the two sides be done the same way. So that's what it looks like. I'm going to lean back against the wall here, and I scored that just about long enough. I need to take 2 seconds and go another 1/4 inch in each direction. So again, you'd rather have to smooth out extra than attach to stuff that isn't scored properly. All right, we are going to attach it in the middle, make sure the middle is over the bat pin, snuggle it up to just below that line, and then I'm going to jiggle it and fold these ends in, keeping it all in that line so that the top of the handle just lines up right underneath that bead of clay that I threw in, that little thrown detail. And I'm going to stop, I won't do anything else. I want to turn it around and kind of show you what that looks like. So sort of ridiculous. It's sticking out pretty far. It's got those big corners. It's super, super long. Take note of that, because you can decide if after it's all done, it doesn't look ridiculous anymore. But this is kind of a process I have honed over the years. So I also really like to kind of do things step by step by step. So I'm going to take my other handle. I think I'm going to need to add a little bit more scoring on the outside edge of this one as well. They were the same handle lengths. Pick this guy up, and I'm going to score it and add some goop to it. Particularly concerned about those ends, so I just added a little extra slip at the ends. All right, now let's go for it. We'll stick this guy on there too. So leaning back, gonna center of the handle over the bat pin, snuggle it up just beneath that bead, jiggle push it on there, and then bring my ends up to the pot. I'm kind of putting my fingers on the ends of the handle and pressing in as I press it against the pot, just to make sure that it's stuck. So now I've got both of those handles on there. I'm going to stand up and look from above and make sure that they look directly across from each other. And because I was silly in how I oriented my loop handle, it makes it a little bit difficult to tell, but I'm going to call it good. And now I'm going to do everything step by step by step. Do something on one handle, do something on the other handle, and get them to be just as absolutely symmetrical as possible. So I'm going to turn it sideways so you can kind of see what my fingers are doing. I've got that little extra flare of clay that was part of the thrown ring, and I'm going to take a damp finger, and by damp I mean literally just damp. I wet it and I dried it on my jeans. There's just dampness, there's not water. I'm going to press it against that seam and slide it along. If you have it wet, you're not going to do anything. You're not going to move any clay. You're just going to slip over the surface. We absolutely need to compress that seam. So wetting your hands up is a really common mistake that people make. So you can avoid it. Just damp. All right, so that top of that seam, feeling good. I'm going to turn the camera. Hopefully you can see there's no gap there. I'm going to again make sure there's no clay on my finger. I'm going to dry it on my jeans so that it's just damp. Press that little flare of clay against the pot and slide it along. Make sure that gap just disappears. Compression. Compression, compression, compression. And not getting it all slimy where you can't actually move the clay. I'm pushing that clay and sealing it right up against that seam. Okay, so both sides have had the top smooth. Now I'm going to do the bottoms. I'm going to have to do that pretty much by feel because I can't see underneath there. But same idea, just going to slide along, make sure that that seam is pressed close. There's no gap. Now that feels beautiful under there. Same thing over here. You can definitely feel it when I start. There's a huge flare of clay and it doesn't feel smooth at all. But just a few passes and it's like it was born there. Okay, it's getting so close to being done. I'm sorry this is taking so long. It's just the reality of making these casseroles. I don't really sell these because they take so much time. You'd have to charge an arm and a leg for them. And so I make these once in a blue moon. I got a nice collection of them that I've kept because I couldn't sell them. And that's all right. We enjoy using them. I kind of like making teapots, you know, you make them because you enjoy the challenge of the form and you enjoy using them, and not exactly your most economically viable product in your product line. I just was smoothing out a little bit of extra scoring marks at the ends that was beyond what I needed. Now, I've got to figure out some way to get this up for you so you can see what's happening. So I'm going to turn my wheel off so there's no accident. That's really a smart idea. I'm going to lift this up, and probably putting it on top of a bucket of water isn't the most secure thing, but with the wheel off, I feel okay about that. All right, so hopefully at this point you can see a little bit more up underneath there. I'm going to turn the wheel manually. And what I need to do is score where I'm going to push the ends of this handle down against the pot. So I'm going to make a sort of a diagonal scoring mark towards the middle of the handle and down diagonally. And I'm going to score the underside of the handle that I'm going to fold down against the pot. I'm going to do that on both sides, and then I'm going to take the ends of the handle and just squish them down and in. And that's going to make them not look so silly and long. Usually I'll wait, I don't know, 5-10 minutes so that I feel really happy about the ends of the handle being good and stuck on. But this video is already taken long enough, so let's go ahead and just go for it. Reaching up underneath there, scoring down towards the middle, and coming down as far down as I think that handle is going to fold. Again, you can always smooth stuff out. And I'm going to score the underside of that handle too, so that I'm going to be folding scored clay down onto scored clay, hopefully making a nice secure seam. Honestly, this isn't the most critical structural part of the process because the handle's on there from the top. So this is just making sure that we don't get a visual break where the handle attaches. Scoring in, down, scoring up underneath. Okay, exciting. It's ready to get folded in. So I'm actually going to come to the side so you have a chance of seeing the way I use my hands for this. So I'm going to take the pad, the flat pad of my thumb. I'm going to support the middle part of the handle. I'm going to take and press and fold the end of the handle down in. I had to switch because I'm having to reach under here in an awkward way. But that end of it is folding down against the pot. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. It's trying to loosen up a little bit at the corner, so I'm just going to press it back. Supporting. Normally I really do like to use my thumb, but I'm having to use fingers just so that I can get in here. As long as you use the pad of the finger, not the point of the finger, it's going to do basically the same thing. Thumbs pressing. Let me turn that for you. So now all of a sudden, that handle that seemed way too long looks about right. I can get 4 fingers under there, just barely, inside of an oven glove, and we're taking this thing to the table with a big smile on our face because the food inside is delicious and the pot's beautiful. One more time. Take this guy down, squishing him down to where it's going to fold. Same thing here. This one did less separating because it had just a little bit longer to relax and feel happily attached. So there's a lesson in that. and things just kind of gel. All right, I'm going to turn that and you can compare. Turn it back again. So they're matching pretty well. I got a little carried away with my scoring underneath there, so I'll have a little bit of smoothing out to do. No sweat. Now the final thing that I like to do that to me makes this handle look a lot more dynamic is take a damp finger and put it underneath there, and instead of it being down like this, I'm going to kind of re-elevate it a little bit by stretching that handle. So damp finger underneath, and I'll just sort of swoop back and forth from attachment to attachment and start lifting it. It creates more of a organic round pocket. And any sense that this was just this thrown, weird, stuck on thing that we made on the wheel kind of goes away. It feels a lot more, well, somewhat mysterious in how it could have been formed, but certainly a lot more attractive and organic looking. So that's what it looks like once you kind of bring it up a little bit. Give a little bit more on this one side. All right, so that's got a nice pocket. It's not sort of down. It's looking a little bit more proud. Same thing on this side. And then I look at it from the side and make sure they're lifted kind of to the same extent. And they're looking pretty good. This one's a little bit more in the middle. And then in a little while, when this all gets stiffened up, I'll come back. You can see these little extra scoring areas that need to get smoothed out. It's no big deal. You just take your finger and rub over them. Again, dry finger or damp finger, not wet. But you can just kind of go around that perimeter and smooth it out. No rush to get that done. These handles, the clay that I used, because it was the leftover trimmings, the clay was pretty stiff, and that made my life a little bit harder than it needed to be. If I had just saved extra clay to make the handle like I should have, my life would have been simpler. But I didn't, and it wasn't, and it's all right. We survived. Together we have made this really complicated covered jar or covered casserole from start to finish. The only thing remaining for me to do is to get this lid off of here and invert the casserole body itself and trim out a little foot. So I may or may not show you that on camera. It's just like trimming the bottom of a plate. But there's your casserole lid, loop handle on lid. Pretty interesting handles, lug handles on the side for taking it out of the oven. Thanks so much for your attention, and I hope you can get something out of this video and have a shot at this somewhat difficult but kind of satisfying project. You might like to try it instead of with 4 pounds on either side, 2 pounds for the lid, 2 pounds for the base. Make something that's a little smaller, personal sized stew pot instead of the one for the family, and then work your way up in scale. But you can also just go for it full size. Thanks again, and have a fun week working on this project.